This is Vernon Niles at 70 Mill Street, right, in Newport, Rhode Island, and it's February the 6th of 1984. I wanted to tell you briefly that the whole purpose of this oral history is to get people like you who've lived here a number of years in a neighborhood and have seen the changes, and to, as you saw them, not as the newspapers talk or anything, just as you remember them as a growing up or living in a neighborhood. And I have to ask your permission to tape this interview. It's all right with you to tell me, and you'll have a chance later to say, so that's all right. And you don't have to answer any questions you don't want to. So that's all. So now I'm going to stop. Okay, now we're going. All right, now first you told me before you did come from Caribou, Maine, right?
I was born in Caribou.
Born in Caribou. And your parents were both from Caribou?
They were from Fort Fairfield, Maine.
And did you stay in Caribou very long after that you were born?
Oh, yes. I think we lived there. I perhaps was 6 years old when we moved up to Presque Isle, Maine.
Okay. And then, did you have any, do you remember it very well up there then?
Oh, yes, I do. I lived in Maine until I was 19, and we owned a house, my husband and I owned a house in Searsport, Maine, and we sold in 1948. Mm-hmm. That's down on the coast on Route 1.
So you sold it even after you'd come to Newport?
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So then, did you have any brothers or sisters?
Oh, I have five sisters.
Oh, really?
I'm the last of them.
You're the last. And are they all up in Maine still?
No, my youngest sister lived in Connecticut, and she is buried in Connecticut. My other sisters are in Maine. My sister, she was the second one. She died 2 years ago. She's buried in Maine. They're all buried in Maine.
You must have been a pretty close family then, with six.
Well, my family, they were very proud of having. They farmed in Maine. My father raised potatoes there when Aroostook County supplied the potatoes for the entire country, you know. Mm-hmm. And so they used to have he had brothers, several brothers, and they all raised potatoes. And they'd have fields of 1,500 acres of just potatoes. And so we lived in Aroostook County, and then later on we owned a house in Searsport, Maine.
Did your mother help in the fields? Did she work outside the home, or
no? She didn't. She always had a garden, and I know when they were ready to harvest dig the potatoes. That's what they called it. Mm-hmm. Oh, my father, she would go out with my father, and he would have her select 1 acre that he would give her.
Oh!
What was...
then would she get when it was sold, that would be her income, sort of pocket money, sort of her own private,
she always planted the garden or supervised the garden. We always had a big garden. Of course, you had to have gardens in Maine then because you raised your own vegetables and fruit.
Did all of you girls help in the gardens?
Well, we weren't all at home at the same time.
Oh.
There were 3. My mother had 3 daughters, and then in 5 years she had 3 more.
Oh, I see.
And so there was so much difference in our age.
2 separate families.
Yes, 2 separate families. Mm-hmm. And I am the middle one of the second group.
Oh, I see. So there. I think that's fun now. 2 groups. That's wonderful. Did you get, then after you moved to Searsport, then you were married in Searsport?
No, I was married up in northern Maine where I lived.
Oh, and then after you left the family, did you see them much? Did any of them come to Newport? You said you visited one sister.
They came here to visit me, and then my one sister that she married a man from Connecticut, and when we came down to Rhode Island, in Newport that day. We had loaned them our car. They had gone to his graduation in Gettysburg.
Oh, yes.
He graduated from Gettysburg College there, and we loaned them our car, so we came down here for the weekend and visited my husband's sister, who was living here in Newport.
Oh, that's the connection. His
Uh-huh.
sister. I
Uh-huh.
see. And that was that when you decided to come here to live?
No, not at that time, but we kept coming back, and we liked it. You know.
Just so I
I've
see.
always liked Newport.
Right, and here you are. Yes. So were you very close to all of your family? The ones in particularly your group?
Yes, we were always
Mhm,
close. I think I was close to as I say, one of my sisters died when she was 13,
Oh.
and when she was 19. So.
Oh, very young.
But the two that I was very close to was my younger sister, the one who lived in Connecticut, and my sister who lived in Maine. And she, when her husband died, she went out to Kansas City and lived with my niece, her daughter. Her daughter married a man from Kansas City. He was national sales manager, Palmar.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
And she lived there the last few years she lived. But she had lived in Maine all her life. And her husband was a potato broker. He bought and sold potatoes.
Oh, for goodness sakes. Hey, that's very interesting. Well, what did your husband do up in...
He worked for the A&P. That's how we happened to be down here. He came down to Connecticut. And then when the Depression came along, of course, there were so many of those places closed that he, like a lot of other people, he lost his job.
Did you open the antique store then?
No.
That came later.
Not at that time.
Did your parents or you have outside interests when you were young, growing up? Anything that even connected with doing this now?
No, of course, we
Just
lived
that
on
you
a
lived-
big rambling farmhouse.
And you knew
right there, like
antiques,
most
yeah.
Up in northern Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And of course, our furniture and there's always antiques. And I think you'll go back to what you were accustomed to. Perhaps most people do.
I think that's
I've
right.
always been interested in antiques. And my sister in Kansas City. I have a picture of the interior of her house. It was in the Sunday paper there.
Really?
I'll show it.
Oh, I'd love to see it. Well, that's exciting. Where did you go to school?
Oh, I went to school in Exeter, Maine. It's a small town.
Where is it near?
And the school has been closed now, and I graduated from Exeter High School, and then I attended the Rustic State Normal School. My sister lived right across from the normal school.
Oh, for heaven's sakes. That is non-existent either, is it, anymore?
Oh, yes.
Oh, it is
But
it?
it's called...
That's
it's
what
it's a college now.
They don't
See,
call them normal school,
schools,
right.
And now they're a teacher's college. It's really a teacher's college.
Right. Did you teach after you got out?
1 year.
1 year. What grade?
And it cut all of them.
Oh, I see. Anything they
country
needed.
schoolhouse in Corinna, Maine.
Oh, in where?
In Corinna, Maine.
Corinna.
Corinna.
For heaven's
Those
sake.
little towns.
Yes.
Like little hamlets.
You just took whatever age was there. You taught that. That subject.
All of the ages, all of the classes were there. I don't think it was a third grade, but you had the first, second, and the fourth, and only 2 or 3 children in each
thing. You
grade.
really had to know a lot,
Yes,
didn't you?
we had 9 grades. I know. I went 9 years to high school, and then we take an examination to. I'm 9 years in the grades, and we had to take a state examination to get into high school.
Boy, that's new. That's different, right? And then you went, and you only taught the 1 year.
Yes, just 1 year.
Was that because you left Maine, or just?
No, I got married.
Oh, I see. This was before you got married, and then you didn't.
Yes.
No, right, okay. And then you stayed in that general area for how many years after you were married?
Let me see. Not many years. So we can't. I'm trying to remember.
Well, it does. I just wondered, that's all right. I was just trying to figure out.
I think perhaps my son was 3 years old when we came down to Meriden, Connecticut. That's where my husband came down to work in Meriden, Connecticut.
That's where he came to work when he lost the A&P?
No, that's when he came down to work for the A&P.
Oh, to work for them. I see. I see.
He was
So,
working for them, then he came down there.
and then, when a little later you came to Newport. Was it after he lost? Did he keep that job for quite a long time
Yes,
down there?
but he worked for the A&P in Connecticut, and we came from Connecticut to Newport. See, we came from Maine down
Yes.
to Connecticut, then from Connecticut to Newport.
And were there? Do you remember any particular experiences that were valuable in your teaching, or those years with the, in the moving that make you really sort of stand out? Or
See, I suppose if I had time to see, I didn't think that you were interested in that.
well,
I hadn't given any
yeah,
thought.
that you don't want you to think too much about it, yeah, right? And I just. Well, I already did that in high school. And, well, when did you start here in the antique business then?
In April 1959.
Oh, then you were
I
here
went to bed.
quite a while
Yes,
before
I had
that.
25 years in April. I've had an antique shop. 24 years over on the Franklin Street, and a year where I am.
You've just been here a year on the Pelham.
Yes.
Oh, I see.
We've owned that building since we came here to Newport. I think. Well, we rented it for a year, and then we bought it. So I have owned that building.
When did you actually move into Newport? Was that in those early 30s or middle 30s?
Yes.
Right after the
Yes,
Depression, then, really, wasn't it?
It was. I remember Pearl Harbor, being there, and also the '39 hurricane. We lived there at that time.
So right. So you were there, and you say you moved into this house a year later?
No, I've owned this house. I bought this house after my husband died.
Oh.
We owned a house on the Ellery Road, and when my husband died, I sold it and I moved back over to Pelham Street and lived there 3 years, and then I bought this house. See, my husband never lived here in this house.
Oh, that's right. Pelham is where I'm getting mixed up. I'm thinking we're on Pelham
is where
Street
my
now.
shop
Pelham
is.
was where I was the other day. What year did he die?
He died in 1963. He's been dead. He'll be dead 21 years in July.
Okay. So then you bought the Pelham Street, and you rented it, you say,
for a year or two. It goes back. I've forgotten whether we rented it a year or 2 years before we bought it.
And then you say you have apartments there now. Did they have apartments then?
Yes, we did. Well, we didn't have. It was rooms. It was a rooming house.
Because it's such a big house.
And you'll find ads about it in the directories. They go back quite far.
Oh, really?
And one of the directories describes it being run on the American-European plan.
Oh, serve breakfast then?
I suppose.
Yeah.
I could show you some of the ads in the directory.
So then, then after you bought it, did you continue to rent apartments out, or?
Well, it was rooms.
I mean, rooms, right?
And there was a long L on it. It's right next door to one of the houses Miss Duke owns, and there was a long L on that too. And we rented rooms. That's the way it had been run before.
And you just went right on.
So we went on renting it. It was very run down. The neighborhood was too. So we cleaned and repaired, and the neighborhood improved.
Well, it's catching, isn't it? It really is. So, that's great. And then what was your husband? Was your husband still with the A&P at that time when you?
No, he wasn't. He worked. I'd rather not go into my.
That's all right.
I can't discuss that with my husband, and anything you can understand. I can't discuss it with him. So I'd rather not go into my husband's.
All right.
Career, if you don't mind, because I don't know how he would feel about it.
That's all right. I thought in case it was connected with what you later did, that's why.
No, it wasn't connected with that business.
Did you work at all then?
No, I worked when we were in Connecticut. I worked for the Miller and Ivanhoe Company in the cost department. Do you know anything about the big offices in the factories where they have different offices, like your production department. I know later my sister worked in the production department. This is the office part of it. And the Miller, and they made the Miller and Ivanhoe lamps there.
Oh.
And I worked in the cost department. We figured the cost of the payroll after the people in the factory had been paid. And I worked for Mr. Rotolo, and I remember when I applied for the job, he hired me because I was from Maine and his wife was from Maine.
For heaven's sake. So it always helps, doesn't it? The little connections. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, he was a graduate of Yale, I remember.
And then when you came here, you didn't do anything for those years until your antique shop. Did you work outside here?
No.
Your son was how old, did you said? Yeah, you had the one son?
Yes, I remember.
So you would have been tied up with him.
My husband working for the A&P, he was about 3 years old. You remember when Lindbergh flew?
Yes.
You don't remember?
Yes, I do. I remember reading about it. Yes. I don't remember.
Why I remember that so well, I was cleaning out the apartment. We were going to live back of the store, and the A&P store, at the time. I remember saying to my little son, "You make me so nervous, I'm going to fly." And he'd been hearing about Lindbergh flying. He said, "Go ahead, Mother, fly."
Oh, that's wonderful.
He thought if Lindbergh could fly, I should be able to fly too.
That's wonderful. So that's good. So then he obviously wasn't too young because he understood what was going on.
I think he was about 3 years old.
He would be aware. So, did you go to any particular churches, either Maine or here?
I remember the Trinity. I've been a
Are
member
you?
of Trinity Church ever since I've been in Newport.
Well, good. So are we. So how about at Maine? Did you belong to church? Was your family were they churchgoers?
Yes. Oh, yes.
So that's why you always.
My husband's family were Baptist, and my mother's Episcopalian.
So you're an Episcopalian.
Yes,
I know that. That's how you go. You always stay with it.
My mother called it the Church of England.
Right. Exactly. And did you have any particular special religious observances of the holidays, or just the typical Episcopalian ones? Right.
Of course, Christmas. We always had Christmas. I remember seeing my father coming in from the woodlot. Of course, in those farms, there always was a big woodlot bringing a big Christmas tree. It always was.
Probably lasted a lot better than they do today.
It would be a tall one.
And was your community, a lot of Christmas things, caroling and that sort of thing going on up there?
I can't remember that so well. I remember them going on sleigh rides before Christmas, going into town to shop and taking. My father would take my sister and the other friends of hers
on the sleigh.
Oh,
how wonderful!
They always had to have robes, and it was cold there.
Oh, that's wonderful. So, who was minister of Trinity when you first came here? Would that be?
Let me see. I can't.
30s?
Rector Hughes, and my son.
Oh yes, she's still Mrs. Hughes.
And Stanley Hughes, who was a rector, was confirmed in his last class.
Really?
Class.
And that was before that was when it was up the hill. Was it that? Oh, that was the parish house up the hill.
High Street. That was K Chapel.
That's right.
And my son was married in K Chapel.
Oh, really? I thought they were. I think they stopped using that just a year or so after we came here.
I'm sorry.
I never really got a chance to see it.
During the war, Dr. Scaife was the rector.
He came from our church in Pittsburgh. He went to our church in Pittsburgh after here, and I never knew he'd been here.
He was a wonderful man.
That's what they say.
And we had services there in K Chapel every Wednesday for families who had someone in the service. Every Wednesday.
Oh, that's nice. So that's good. And so now we already know that you first lived in Pelham Street. You said the Gidley House. It was called. Was that what you told me?
No, it was built by John Gidley.
Built by John Gidley.
Built by John Gidley. There was Do you want me to tell you something about the Pelham
Will be a
House?
little bit Yes, I would like to hear about
Well,
it.
it was built by John Gidley. He built several houses in that area, and there was a street, Gidley Street, named for him. You know Gidley Street.
I've seen
downtown.
that. Yes.
And there was a house there on Gidley Street that he built, and then there's a house on Franklin Street. It's called the Gidley House. Well, and during the war, there was a French officer billeted there.
Oh.
And the Pelham House, where my shop is.
Mm-hmm.
And it was owned at that time by Honeymoon. I don't know whether they would.
Oh, did he? Oh.
These people who built Honeymoon Hall would be descendants of that Honeymoon.
Oh, for goodness. Probably. It's an unusual name. Yeah. Did when you moved here, was your neighborhood pretty friendly? Was the street...
Oh, yes. I knew all of them then, and I miss all of them now. They're all gone.
Oh, really? That's
I like Joe, the only one left.
So you've really
My
seen the
family,
changes.
Yes, I have.
Did you do a lot of visiting and...
No, I never did that. I worked in that house. It was a big, rambling
So it
house.
took most of
It took most of my time, and but I knew my neighbors.
Mm-hmm. Sort of over the fence and up and down the street.
Mr. and Mrs. Cole across the street, his first wife died after I came there, and then I knew his second wife better. They attended Trinity Church, and of course we'd walk back from services in the morning together. I knew, and then Mr. and Mrs. Nagel lived across the street. They're dead, and when we moved into the Pelham House, the house that Miss Duke owns there on the near
Yes.
Main Street, they had a bicycle shop in the front of it.
Oh, really?
And on the other side, in the house she owns, there was an electrical shop.
So it was a mixed. You had
Of
part
course,
shops
it's
and
zoned
part...
for commercial and residential, and it was many of the places were commercial.
Did most of the people who worked in those shops, were they living in the houses that the shops were in?
Well, the Beulahs lived in the shop they were in, and in the house near Spring Street, just the other side of 38 Pelham Street, there were apartments. They rented, I think there were 2 or 3 apartments. There was an electric shop. I believe his name was Goff or Groff that owned the electric shop. And then there was 2 apartments over the shop, one on the second, one on the third floor.
Were there a lot of children around? Or did your son have many playmates?
Oh, he had playmates, but not right around there. A friend of mine lived up the street, Mrs. Evans, and he was very friendly with her son. And then he was friendly with another boy. His parents owned the shipyard at that time.
So, and it was still stayed pretty much within this area. He was he didn't go far afield.
No,
He, you know,
he attended John Clark School, Lenthal, and then John Clark and Rogers High School.
So it's still used. So he really grew up in the neighborhood.
yes.
Then he lived all his life in that.
Yes, he did.
So that's nice. So were there any problems with neighbors, or was it various ethnic differences, or were they all pretty much the same income and the same?
Well, I never thought much about ethnic groups at the time.
I don't think any of us did.
No, I never. I don't think so.
So they must not have been. You would remember,
we had no problems that way at all.
nobody.
People, no.
And so you don't remember? Do you remember any special events of the neighbors getting together for helping somebody, or any special things that happened?
I think that probably more things that I remember about the area and the things that happened in the house happened during the war. Of course, the hurricane came along. That was a devastating thing.
Oh, absolutely.
We didn't expect it. We didn't realize what was going on at the time.
I know.
Knocked our chimneys down and filled our cellar with water.
Oh boy, and you think here you are on a hill too, and you'd still got it.
That was close.
You were closer down over there too. So, did you own this house at that time? Did you get this?
No, I bought this house 16 years ago.
Oh, so you have my goodness, 2 of them then to manage. So that's wonderful. How about Christmas and celebrations now? For instance, now we have the Christmas in Newport. Did they do any kind of neighborhood Christmas celebrating here?
I
then?
suppose, yes, they do, but I don't know that much about the Christmas in Newport. I know it's a wonderful thing. Mrs. Myers.
Yes, I
started
know.
it.
Yes.
And but I'm older now, and I don't go out in the evening. They always invite me. I get an invitation,
Yeah.
but I don't go.
I know. I know. I know.
Not as active in the evening.
You can look and see a lot of it right
yes,
from
that's
here.
True.
But did they do anything like that at all then? I mean, other than did people celebrate
No,
Christmas
I think
particularly?
I don't think so. I'm sure I'd have heard about it.
Oh yes, if you would have seen if there were any carols or caroling or on the
I
streets or
suppose
anything.
There might have been, but not in that neighborhood.
Not in that neighborhood. You don't remember anything like that. Was there anyone there who was particularly outstanding or important to all the neighbors? You know that often you have one person that kind of takes over or runs around or tries to. Can they give anyone outstanding or any outstanding people or?
Well, there were outstanding people. Of course, there are people who were born in the neighborhood that are remembered. In the house across the way where the Nagels lived, they have died. Dr. Stewart was my doctor when I first came to Newport. He was born there.
Oh.
And let's see. I never thought, if I had thought about those things.
Well, that's all right. Maybe it'll come out when we discuss the
Yes,
war and that sort of thing. And how about, did you have any help in that big house with your children or with your child or?
Not at that time. You know, things were so different than they are now. It was very, it was, it was after the Depression, and, I did have some help later on, but not at that time. And did any of your family come here a lot to see you and your son? Well, my sister Evelyn, the one who I told you about, she had gone to Gettysburg to attend her husband's, he wasn't her husband then, they were engaged, graduation. She came often, and then my sister in Northern Maine, she came down. They were the only sisters living.
Yeah, right. So, then did they tell your son family stories or keep him sort of knowing about what had gone on before his? Because often when you get down to just a few, there's.
Yes, that's true.
But did they have children too that they brought to play with him?
Oh, my sister, my youngest sister had a girl and boy, but see, they were much younger than my son. And then my older sister, she had a daughter, the one I told you, she lived with in Kansas City, Missouri.
But you were really pretty spread out with your family. So did you get back to Maine much?
Oh yes, we went back to Maine. See, my husband was from there, and his family was
So when
there.
you have two people,
we always went back to Maine once a year at least.
Did you go a particular time, like Christmas or summer, when the weather?
No, we didn't go at Christmas time because it's so cold. There's so much snow on, and in the winter up in Maine, the snow would come on in November and stay on until April.
You don't need that.
Snowbound.
You're right. You might never get back. So, did you have any special ideas or plans for your son when he was very young? Did you have any ideas of things you wanted him to be when he grew up?
He was very good in math in school, and he wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. And of course, being the only one, we had great plans for him.
Sure, naturally.
And of course, the war came along and it ended
those plans. So where did he go to school? Did he get to go to school?
He graduated from Rogers High School, and he has a degree from Boston University.
Oh, really? Good.
And he's attended other universities as they moved along. He traveled for the Veterans Organization.
Oh, good for him.
Several years, and he and his wife both attended different colleges and universities through the country.
He's now in California, you said. What's he doing there? Does he still working for the?
He has retired. He's legally blind.
Oh boy.
And he is retired now. He was a I don't think of his title. He worked for the welfare
Uh-huh.
coordinator.
Uh-huh. And does he get back often?
Yes, they come twice a year, and then I have a grandson he comes twice a year. So they try.
That's wonderful. I think that's good. Did you tell me you have great-grandchildren,
Yes,
too?
I do have.
A grandson, and then how many great-grandchildren?
I have two.
Two. Wonderful. Where do they live?
They live in California.
Oh, the whole family's out there. They're all out there.
They went to California when the boys were, I think, about perhaps 8 and 9.
Mm-hmm.
They came back and spent a summer with me when they were 15 and 16.
Oh, that's an age.
They were beautiful boys.
Oh, I bet.
Blonde and they were 6 feet tall. I was so proud of those boys.
That's wonderful. Oh, that's wonderful. How about how long? Now you've been in this neighborhood ever since you came here, but how did you have to pick this neighborhood? Just by luck you found the house, or?
Well, I think I've always been interested in these early houses.
Mm-hmm.
I doubt if there's a house in this neighborhood I haven't gone through long to buy.
Oh, really?
My husband restrained me.
Oh, this was sort of a hobby, right?
Well, I've been interested in old houses before Mr. Weaver was too.
Yes,
George
we have
Weaver.
George, one of his
Yes.
his first house.
He was always interested in the house, and he'll tell you I was too. I know I wanted to buy the Prescott house on the corner.
Yeah.
The General Prescott's house.
Yes.
On the
Oh,
corner of
yes.
Pelham and Spring.
The one that's now an inn.
Restrained me.
Yeah.
And my son, after he graduated from college, for 2 or 3 years, he worked for the state welfare here, and perhaps I shouldn't mention people by their names. Do you want me to do that?
It's all right to mention if there's nothing, and if they're not living, just for his.
Well, there was a woman lived in there, and my son really admired her in that house. And at that time, the house, I think it looked just the same as it did when General Prescott was.
Right. You mean?
Hadn't been changed at all. It hasn't been changed much over the years. That's a wonderful thing about some of these houses. This house, for instance, hasn't been either. So, as I say, I've gone through most of the houses.
So you could really.
In the area.
Have you been through them? A lot of them since they've been changed. So
yes,
that's
yes,
fun.
I've
Isn't it?
gone on tours. This house was on a tour once.
Oh.
In the clapboard group, you probably heard about.
Yes.
When they had a tour to raise money, and this house was open at the time.
That's good. That must have been fun. It's fun to go through. I think it's particularly fun to see what's
I don't
changed.
dare do it anymore. I've been robbed in my shop.
I know. I think a lot of people don't want to do it. In this Christmas in Newport, they really don't like to have people going and looking and casing. So, did it look pretty much the same, other than the neighborhood? That is it today as it did then, other than being spiffed up?
All of these houses have been restored. So many houses in the neighborhood have been restored and painted. No, it was a very run-down neighborhood.
Like the Point.
That's the point. I know I was talking to a man in the city hall, in the office, the assessor's office, and I said that at one time that was really considered slum. He says, I know where I live was too, at the Point and this area. Of course, that's where nearly all the early houses are.
Sure, right in town. That's exactly. So, and, well, like I said, how do you feel about the changes? I would guess you like them because it all spruced up.
I think what Miss Duke has, the improvements she has made is some wonderful things. And I think that people is catching. Other people do, you know. And we'll go back to whether you shopped in this neighborhood and whether there were lots of stores. There were. Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes. There were small stores in the neighborhood. The one I remember where we did most of our shopping, of course we did, as I said before, we went to the A&P, but then we bought a lot of things from Mr. and Mrs. Hill. They had a little shop on Thames Street. He was a fisherman, and they had this small shop, and they lived upstairs.
Could you get most everything you needed right in the neighborhood?
Most everything.
And then
Our milk was delivered. You know, the milk, the people from the creameries would deliver our milk at the door.
That's
We
right.
bought our milk, I think it was from the Newport Creamery.
They were here then.
Uh-huh.
Oh,
I'm
so
quite sure it was the Newport Creamery. I know we did buy from them.
then you said you took your son, the places you used to go, you took your son down swimming.
Down at Kings Park, he learned to swim
Yeah.
down at Kings Park. We'd go down there Sundays, and then later on, when he was older, they would swim off Ann Street Pier.
Did you have to go with him then, or he could go on his
No,
own
I
then?
went with him to Kings Park, but when they were swimming off Ann's Pier, he went with other boys.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember he swam across to, what was it, the torpedo station. But I know how frightened I was when I learned that he did that, you know.
That's a long swim.
It was a long
Oh,
I think it was the torpedo station. It was across there anyhow.
yes. Well, that would be, yeah, that's a long one. Were there organizations, any neighborhood organizations that you belonged to?
Not at that time. He belonged to the Boy Scouts. Later on, I belonged to.
How about, were you active at anything at the church? Were there any ladies groups?
Yes, I was. Going back to K Chapel, there was I don't know what, I think it was, there was let me see.
That's a,
There I told you about the group that, the services we had for the families who had someone in the service. And then the other group, I was treasurer of St. Margaret's Guild.
oh,
There's a St. Margaret's room there in K Chapel. Well, it was a St. Margaret's Guild at that time. And Mrs. Leroy King, you've heard of her probably.
Yes.
She was a program director. It would be, she was the head of the group, like a president would be in perhaps in some other group. And Mrs. Stanley Yu, was a secretary, and I was the treasurer. I seemed to get to be treasurer in several groups.
It must have been your son's mathematical you got from you.
No, I didn't.
Did it meet weekly?
The Vienna Club, yes, we met once a month.
The St. Margaret's.
No, that's St. Margaret's.
Yeah.
The Vienna Club was another group that I belonged to that later on. That was during the war.
Mm-hmm. The St. Margaret's group, did they do a special thing? Did they make, or just meet for social?
For social, they had money. They had quite a bit of money, I remember. I remember the Chase Manhattan Bank and the other places where the money
where you
was
were
deposited.
putting it. So they,
yes, and the group was, well, I don't know how to describe it. I don't think we ever raised money by having card parties like we did in the Vienna Club. I also was member of Trinity Circle.
I was going to ask about that. Mm-hmm. Do you ever go to that now?
No, I did. I did go to that after I opened my shop, but for the 2 years before after I opened my shop, I was vice president. They wanted me to be president, but I couldn't be.
No,
I had the shop.
When you have a
so I
business,
finally, you know, when you get older, you stop going out.
I know.
So
Did you ever consider moving out of this neighborhood? You said
No,
you were looking at houses all the time.
Well, they were always in this
Always
neighborhood.
right
See,
here.
the early houses. We were buying the house on the corner here, right on the corner, when my husband died.
Oh.
And that was before we bought this. And my husband, he was sick, and he seemed to be disturbed at times. And he would say, it worried him. I suppose he knew that he was going to die, and he was worrying about me having that house alone. So when he died, I sold it. Well, George can tell you about that. He sold it for me, that house. But I still wanted a house, just a house, you know. The house I live in is a big house, the house on Pelham Street. I wanted a private home, an early one. And so I bought this 16 years ago.
So, and then...
Well, we were buying that one, and we had paid a deposit on it, and we were to get the deed Monday, and the woman who owned it dropped dead in the Y.
For heaven's sake.
And so then my husband was sick. It had to go through probate.
Mm-hmm.
And he was sick, and he was very disturbed about me buying it. And so when he died, I sold it, or George sold it for me.
So that left you with this and the Pelhams.
I didn't have this.
I see.
Before.
That's right. You said 16 years ago, so you just had the Pelham
I
Street.
just had the Pelham, but I later on bought this one. I'm glad that I have this one. I like this one.
Good. Did you find the other one pretty big?
The one on the corner?
On Pelham.
Oh, yes. The one on Pelham is a big house. And of
mhm.
course there are a lot of people in it. And going back to getting older, when you get older, you'd like a little more privacy.
I think so. Are you alone in this house then?
No, there's an apartment on the second floor.
Because this
They've
is a
lived there
pretty
12
big house.
years. Yes, it is.
hmm But not as, that one rambles, so.
No, it is. It's a big house.
Did you own your shop on Franklin Street?
No,
that building?
I didn't
No.
own the building.
No. So that you just rented, so that was not a problem. You didn't have to worry about that. When did your son move away? After the war?
I've forgotten how long he worked for the state welfare. That was after he graduated from Boston University. Then he traveled through. First he had 4 states, and then I think they kept increasing them until he had 12 states that he traveled through. And they lived in Indiana. She taught there as they stopped in different places. She taught as they went along to California in different schools. And
that's pretty good, though. Yeah. So they were moving a lot around for a number of years till he retired.
While he was working for the blind veterans.
So that were the people in this neighborhood mostly families then,
Yes.
not single people like today. I guess there are a lot of single apartments.
Yes, they were mostly families. Of course, when we rented places, we'd rent them to couples too, usually, but later on to people with children.
So that it,
But most of them were families, and they had, like the Nagels across the street from the Pelham house. They had, I don't know how many children. I think three girls and 4 or 5 boys.
Imagine it was relatively safe. Were there any restrictions on where the children could go here? I mean, there weren't as many cars as today. So
No.
did you let your son just kind of
Oh,
go
yes,
and?
They'd go swimming. That was
Right. It was just a different.
a lot of time swimming.
Did you have a lot in common with your neighbors, even though you were busy with your house and couldn't spend a lot of time? But you all were pretty much.
Well, I had very friendly neighbors. I like my neighbors. And I miss them.
Yeah. Were many of them Trinityites too?
Well, the Coles were, and see the Coles. The Nagels, they were. I think they probably attended St. Mary's. I know she did. And then the Cobschels lived on the corner. I don't know what church they attended. I'm sure.
It's a good Newport name.
Yes.
Were people friendly right from the beginning when you moved
yes.
in?
Yes,
That's
they
good.
were.
And did you have more friends outside of the neighborhood or in? Did you have
I think most of my friends were outside of the neighborhood.
Did you meet them like through church and things
Church,
like that? And was Franklin Street just all shops when you went there?
No, so many of the buildings on Franklin Street were vacant when I opened my shop. And I was alone on the street for 2 or 3 years. There was a second-hand shop across the street. And I think about 2 years after I moved in down where my shop was, he moved across the street in the Gidley house. And he started selling antiques. He had been selling second-hand furniture. He might have had some antiques in there. And then they gradually started moving in. And now when the shop is vacant, someone it rents
Mm-hmm.
right away to someone who's interested, has an antique shop,
And
which is good, you know,
and
to have all the
it
shops
all
on
together,
one
it
street
always
for people
helps
who are
everybody.
browsing. Yes, it
Mm-hmm.
does, it
Mm-hmm.
helps, and it's, I think people coming into, they always like to find a street where it's all shops.
And you don't have to
They
keep
go one shop to the other.
right, and don't have to keep moving to some. Do you find you get a lot of overflow from there still? I mean, they know your shop on Pelham.
Yes, they do. They keep coming in, you
And
know, they'll look for me, and the other dealers have been very kind. They'll tell them where I am, you know, and that helps. And you see, I had those two big windows in that shop, and I would have a spinning wheel and antiques in the window, and people going to the post office and walking back toward the shop, they would come in.
Sure.
And when they came in there, then they'd go on up the street. So I think my neighbors in the antique business miss me because of that. See, they don't have antiques in the shops there now. One is a paper shop and the other.
That's right. That's right. And there's been, just since we've been here, a number of changes. Let's see, did you, I asked you about church, but did you join any civic organizations?
Well, I'm a past matron of the Eastern Star.
Oh, really?
That was in, I think, 1952 or 53. I was worthy matron of the Eastern Star. And, of course, when you're in the Star, you help, when you're worthy matron, you help with the Rainbow Girls.
Oh, that's right.
And,
I remember my
and
husband's
the
family.
church and the Star and the work I did during the war at the Army Navy Y. Of course, up on Pelham Street too. During the war, we used to go there. The Red Cross had a room up there in that in the Van Zandt house.
Oh.
On Pelham Street. We used to go up there once a week and make bandages and different things for the service. Knit whatever they needed. We tried to do.
Yes, I can remember doing some of those things. How would you rank, now this is a funny question, but how would you rank different groups in terms of social prestige? Now, this was one I asked me, I'm
in the church
or just to rank. That's a funny one. Maybe just in the whole city. I don't. Well, we could say what group had political power that you know of in this town at that time. Did you feel there was any group that was more running the city than others?
Well, do you think I should get involved in that?
No, I think I don't myself know what groups had political power.
Well, this is, I think, a democratic city. The state is.
Yes, definitely. And I don't even know whether it means a religious group or I probably shouldn't be saying anything either, because I'm not quite sure how that. Well, how do you feel about living in Newport?
Oh, I like Newport. I like the people. I've been in so many homes. I've bought from people and I've sold to them. So I like Newport. Of course, I'm from Maine. I have to always tell people I'm from Maine because my ancestors would be very unhappy.
Oh, I can't ever forget those
things. I like Newport and I like the people, and I think they've been kind to me.
You've never thought ever about leaving then, I guess. This
never.
was home. Once you came here, this was home to you. And, well, I'm going to stay
in Boston. Then I listened to McNeil Lair report, and I
they're
turned
excellent.
over to Nightline, and so I'm very interested, but I've never been active in politics.
Did you find your neighbors particularly politically active when you were in those years?
I can't remember that they were. I don't know of any of them that was interested.
I think when you're involved with raising families, your time is taken up in your big house, and Lord knows the World War was enough of a political thing.
Some places, like we came from in Connecticut. I suppose that's why we came here.
Maybe. That's
and
interesting.
Property too was very cheap at that time here.
Other people have said they didn't sense the Depression as much.
Not as much as in some other places.
And some of the other things will be the sure it. Okay. I just want to go back to our earlier conversations, and this is about this neighborhood, and how, I don't remember whether I asked you how you happened to pick it. Was it just because of the old houses?
Well, I have gone through nearly all of the early houses in this neighborhood. And see, I had that big house down there, but I wanted a house just for myself. That's an apartment house. And we were in the process of buying the one on the corner. I think I told you that.
Yes, right.
And so George sold that for me when my husband died because he seemed concerned about my having it alone.
Yeah.
And so I met Mr. Harrington. The Harringtons owned this house. He was to come in my shop. They had antiques here, and they were interested in antiques. And I told him I had thought of buying the house on the corner, so he said, "Why don't you buy mine?"
Oh.
So I went through the house with him. Of course, I was very interested in it. It's a nice old house. And that's how I became interested in this house or knew about it.
So then, did you find that most of your neighbors around here are native Newporters? Or at least when you came here, were they pretty much, had they lived here all their lives?
I think so. See, the man next door, I told you I had my milk delivered. He delivered the milk. I think he worked for the one of the Newport dairies. Mr. I think of his name right now, but it won't come to me.
But
they sold their house to a man, and he started restoring it, but he gave it up and bought a condominium, and now there's another family.
So today there aren't so many of the natives. I mean, people have come in and right.
People have come in. But there were quite a few native people that were here, I'm sure, when I bought this house.
In your antique shop, did most of the people there live in their shops, over their shops? And were they mostly natives when you were on all of Franklin Street?
No, not. I don't think any of them lived in their houses. And of course, there were no antique shops there when I opened.
Right, you were the beginner of that. You mentioned also that the L was removed from the Pelham Street house. Was that after you came? You did that?
Oh, we did that.
You did that?
We did that after the Navy left.
I
see. The house was vacant for 3 years. And when, I did it. My husband was dead then. I had it done. And the house next to me, Miss Duke owns it. It had the long L. It's the same as my house had. I have a picture of them. Would you like to see it?
Yes, I would. When we get we could. All right. Fine, I'll stop.
End of my house on Pelham Street. See, this is a house next door to me, the King House.
Right.
And it was built, I think, in 1730. It's some older than my house. My house was built in 1744. And see, it had a bicycle shop in the front. Of course, she had all of this removed. This part here. Mr. and Mrs. Beulah owned it.
Oh.
When I moved there, when we bought our house.
So, that's great. It's good you have these. And let's see. Were most of these families more than one family? I don't know whether I asked you that before, but
on this street,
on Pelham and Mill when you came here.
Well, the house
I know
on
yours
Pelham Street was never a one-family house, and in Beulah's it wasn't a one-family house. See, they had those long L's,
right?
And there were 3 apartments. I believe there were 3 apartments on each floor, which made 9 apartments.
So it wasn't a question of their own families living, an extended family. It was just regular apartments. And let's see. Was it? Did you have a feeling that these streets were crowded and busy or bustly, or was it very relaxed and easygoing living?
Well, they weren't busy like they are now.
No. So
of course, at that time when we bought that house, there was only one destroyer in here, the Hamilton.
Oh, sure.
The fleet came in, of course, later, just before the World War II.
And that's what we'll get into, because that. Then on the other thing was when you started your Franklin Street shop. Did you just take some of your own furnishings to start it, or had you taken a course or anything?
Well, I had always been interested in antiques, living on the farm in Maine, where houses are furnished with antiques, and everyone in my family, I suppose, like antiques.
So then, as I said, did you just started to?
I took things. Most of the things I had been going to auction with a friend of mine, Mrs. Simpson, George Simpson's wife, a second wife. He was a jeweler here for years here in Newport. Everyone will know George Simpson, the older people. And she and I went to auctions, and I'd pick up things there. Sometimes you start these shops in self-defense, you require so much merchandise, you have to do something.
So you might as well make it work for you, right? Well, did you get, when your various members of your family died, did you inherit things from them that you brought down?
No, I didn't. We had things in the house in Maine, but most of them went with the house when we sold it. And no, I didn't acquire anything.
I just wondered.
It's been so many years before. I did get the things that my mother had later on, but not at that time.
And you said you started in 1959.
1959. It will be 25 years in April.
And then did people bring you around town when you wanted to start bringing things in,
did.
or asking you to come to their?
Mrs. Simpson, she was a nurse, and she was very concerned. She thought I might fail in my business venture, so she helped me. Those cases that I had in there had belonged to her husband, and they on Franklin Street years before, when he had a jewelry store. His store was on Franklin Street at that time. It was never there that I can remember. It was before I came to Newport, or before I moved my shop to Franklin Street. And the cases had belonged to his sister when she had collection of dolls. So they sold them to me, and I have one in the shop now, and then I sold one to the Fays because I didn't want to take it into the house. I thought it was too much, too big cases.
And now people still come and ask you to come to their house and look at their
that's why
furniture?
I get most of my merchandise. People call me, and I've done a lot of advertising over the years.
Oh, that's true. I didn't think of that. If you're looking for some special, do people also ask you to look for special pieces for them?
Yes, they do.
Sort of like a decorator.
And they call and ask me if I have special pieces, and I do sell to the decorators.
That's great. So I think I'm pretty much up to. Then it was the Marie Wilson. What was she a friend of you, or part of one of these groups you were in, like the AI?
No, she wasn't. I think I met her. She brought things to me or called me, and she was an artist. I wish I'd kept some of her paintings. I thought they were well done.
Oh yes, they're lovely. But so you say her father was Bishop of Rhode Island at one time?
Oh, her father was Bishop.
So you didn't know him?
No. She was elderly when I knew her.
Oh, that's all right. You had mentioned that most of your good friends did not live in the neighborhood. They're from church. Where did they live? All over Newport?
Yes, they did. Now let me see. Mrs. Simpson, I know I went with her when she and her husband were planning to restore that house on, it's right next to the spaghetti place there off Broadway. It's,
yes, I know. You mean
Equality Park West.
Yes.
I think it's the second house in. I went with her, and they bought that house and restored it. They had 2 apartments down and 2 up. I'm sure Miss Bolthouse. Is it Bolthouse?
Bolthouse. I think Bolhouse. I think.
I thought it was. I'm sure she'll remember George Simpson because he was a jeweler here for years. She was a very good friend of mine. And then Mrs. Evans, and of course Mrs. Some of these women here, Nickerson, she lived in the house, and Mrs. Smith, who played the piano down at the YMCA.
Oh.
She lived in the house on Pelham Street. I think I'm in Pelham Street. I'm not. They live in the house on Pelham Street. I'm trying to remember. Mrs. Fry was a friend of mine, and Mrs. Fraser. Mrs. Fry lived on one of those little side streets over off Broadway, I think. And Mother Barrett, she was everybody's friend. And
There's always someone.
Yes, she was. Her husband was on this. Her son was on the staff of the Y. And let's see who knows. Of course, I had other friends and other groups.
Oh, right. Yes, in the church, and they would be all from all over town.
Star. Probably more of my friends were there than.
And they were from all the different parts of town. Yeah. So, were you active at the Y?
Oh yes, I was during the war. Very active.
Right.
We belonged to this Wyanda group. We were a very active group. We raised the money to make the sandwiches and the cake for servicemen.
So that's
200 and 300 a Sunday.
Oh my golly, that was something. Oh, and I think we're about done with this neighborhood. But what did you have in common with the people right in your Pelham Street neighborhood then?
Well, they were good neighbors. I didn't have the Coles attended Trinity Church, and I did. We would all come together. I was friendly with all of them, and the Evanses owned the little house on the corner. Of course, she was a very good friend of mine. But see, next door to me was an electric shop. I think Groff's owned the electric shop, and then next door was Beulah. She was an elderly woman.
Oh, there's your door.
Queen Anne Square.
Oh, really?
It's a beautiful yard. I don't think there's one like it around. This Duke has quite a bit of land, but not as much as that house is with it.
One of the nicest things about some of the older houses is that the yards are behind and private.
Behind.
Yeah, and
they usually are. They're built right on the sidewalk, and the yards are in back.
No, I'll peek at it the next time I come over because I want to come over to your
Yeah,
shop
it
again.
It seemed wonderful until this revaluation started. Then the price is locked in so much a square foot.
Then you began to wonder whether you're glad you have. Before we go on to the other things, are there any particular things you remember about the neighborhood that we haven't talked about, or just special events that, not the war things, which we'll get into, but just the people or anything that happened while you were living there that was...
I'm trying to remember.
It doesn't matter if you can't right away. I just thought, just don't want to miss anything.
Yes, I should have looked in that little scrapbook, but I don't know what.
No block parties or things like that.
No, they didn't have them in that area.
Okay, what I'm going to do is now...
Fall River Line, one of their ships from to New York to the World's Fair
did
in 1939. And that was, I think, the last year that you were in operation. And I did enjoy it. They had the old staterooms, and then since I've been in business, I've sold pictures of the ships and also their old brass keys and books and different things that there are people who collect that.
I know. But you just had the one trip. Did you ever go down to see them come in? I hear people used to do that, to the lights and how pretty it was just to watch them.
No, I don't believe I did. I don't remember doing that, but I did enjoy the trip. I think we had to go to Fall. It seems to me I went to Fall River to get that boat.
Probably. I heard people discussing it, but I don't remember.
I don't remember either. And that's strange that I wouldn't, but I did enjoy the trip. Right down there, I know.
Did you come back on it, or just go down? Did you come?
I must have come back on it.
Not the train, yeah.
Is that strange? I don't remember that. I remember about the fair. That was in 1939. I think that was the last year that line was in operation.
They went out just abruptly. Yes, I remember that. They told us that. Did you get a lot of tourists coming in by that boat? Did your shop? Oh, you didn't
No.
have your shop then, though, did you?
No, I didn't.
No, so you weren't aware of extra amounts of people at this end of town because of it. And so that when it closed, was your neighborhood affected? Did you know anyone that worked on it? Anybody from your neighborhood?
Yes, I did. I knew, now again, that goes, that's the Star, the Order of Eastern Star and the Masons. Janice Luth worked on that. Does that mean anything?
The name
they
Luth
lived, I
does.
think, over around on Washington Street, over in that area. And he was a patron of the Order of the Eastern Star here, and he was a grand patron of the Grand Lodge of Rhode Island, and his wife was a worthy matron of the Order of the Eastern Star. And it was a very active group at that time and well attended.
Must have been.
Those groups are not anymore.
No, my husband's grandmother was very active, and his aunt, but you know, you don't hear so much about them now. I guess there's just too much nowadays.
Oh, yes.
I think that's the
Television
thing.
and radio and all the different things that we didn't have then.
Was this Mr. Luth, he worked on before the Fall River line?
Now, I think they lived in his wife's house, and I think that it was her father-in-law who worked. I'm not sure where Janice worked. I think he worked over the torpedo station. At that time, most of the men in Newport were employed in the torpedo station.
That was the biggest employer, right?
And I think that's where he worked. I think his father-in-law worked on the Fall River line, and they had furniture and different things from that. I'd often get silver too. It was always plated, with the pictures and different little trays and different things would have that.
I guess it was very elegant. They say it was lovely. Those trips. So it really didn't affect, when it closed, it really didn't affect your life very much.
No, it didn't. No.
Did you know anybody who was really affected by it?
No. I think you will find someone in Newport who will know more about it.
There are some, and there are people who worked on the shops down that took care of the boat. I know. But then now the Depression. You came here sort of in the middle of it, didn't you?
No, it was
30
after the Depression, I think.
Roosevelt. You came about the same time Roosevelt was elected, didn't you?
Yes.
And because I figured you wouldn't know too much how it affected Newport.
It didn't seem to affect Newport as badly as it did most areas, the areas I had been in before.
And did you come here because of the Depression, and your husband's job at the A&P was lost at the Depression?
Yes, he lost his job.
And so that you were affected, even though it wasn't Newport that affected. Right.
Newport. Well, Newport was affected, but not as badly as Meriden, Connecticut, where we came from.
Did you see it in your neighborhood on Pelham? Did you see many bad effects of it?
Well, the buildings were run down. It was a poor neighborhood at that time. I sympathize with these young people. I watched the...
Was that just a summer... Here it says a pleasant summer house. Was it just for summer people or all year round?
No, all year round.
I've got to go through some of these. There we go. So now back to the Depression. You said did you know anything about the Civic Employment Association? That was a group that was formed to help people who were affected. And I wrote this notes I had, and let's see. Now they said there were rumors at that time of the torpedo station closing. Did you remember that, or neighbors? See, you probably came right in the middle of all this.
Yes, I do remember the rumors, and of course they were frightened about that, like they were when they heard about the fleet moving out of the Navy.
But of course, it didn't come off, and it still employed quite a few people. How about Prohibition? Now, That was still going. That just ended about then, too. So did you ever hear any stories about the rum runners and the...
Oh, yes. Yes, I did. I know there was a bar on, let's see, it was on Thames Street. I don't think I should name names here, do you?
Depends on what they were doing.
Well, supposedly they were rum runners.
Uh-huh. Because apparently... what was the feeling? Were people bothered by that, or they didn't mind a bit that there were smuggling going on? And
well, I don't remember that. I suppose there were people who did, the temperance people, I imagine.
But
the speakeasies, if you go to them, that usually they had a little opening in the door where they could open it and look out to see who you were.
See if you were acceptable.
Yes. And if you passed muster from outside, they let you in. I think of course, it created a lot of crime, but not in Newport.
They say that later it did. It got into the real, the mobs got into it. But did you think people in general were for or against Prohibition? How did you feel about it?
I think they were against it. I don't think you can. I never thought it was very smart.
No. Apparently, I know.
People want to drink, they'll get it.
Yes.
And the home brew. Oh, I do remember my brother-in-law. He was his parents were born in Germany, and they were from Plymouth, Mass. He made home brew. I remember that. I remember the different. He had a way of making it. I think he used these old copper boilers in some way. Malt. I don't know what else he put in it, but he made home brew for his own consumption as for his friends.
Sure.
He didn't make it to sell.
It didn't sell. I guess that at one point there was a law that if you made it for yourself, that was all right, but if you sold it, that was bad.
I don't
Again.
think you were supposed to make it either. I'm not sure about that.
So, were there any speakeasies right around your neighborhood? You said Tim's. Was that?
Yes, that was I suppose a speakeasy. Well, almost any of the, I can't remember any. I don't dare say, because I don't remember any that were really speakeasies.
Just suspected.
Yes.
Did you know of anyone? Well, you did. You knew somebody who made home brew, but didn't sell it, but made it. Your brother-in-law. Did you know any neighborhood that was particularly active in this sort of thing?
Well, I think it was down in that area, down probably along Wharf and down in that Ann Street Pier. I believe that saloon or bar room was down in that area.
Of course, they brought it in by boat.
Yes,
too.
they brought it in by boat.
You never saw any of it actually going on, the boats coming in or rum running or anything? Been kind of fun to see.
I don't think they would.
They didn't really want you to see.
No. They were brought in at night.
Did you know anyone after the repeal that continued in the liquor business, and did you see any effects of the gangster influence in Newport?
No, the O'Neill's bar room, that was the one down on Thames Street. It was there after Prohibition, and of course the bars. There was a Mahogany Bar and the Pelham Cafe. They were all along there. The Mahogany Bar was down the center of town, and the Pelham Cafe was down the corner of Pelham Street.
It was a busy, active
neighborhood.
Now, where were you when the hurricane hit?
At the 38 Pelham.
At 38 Pelham. So what happened to you during? How was...
Well, I don't think anyone in Newport really realized what was happening. See, we weren't warned. And it came in with the tide. That was why it's so devastating. I have the book on it. And it knocked down our chimneys. There was some water in the cellar, but that's the only way we were affected. The water came way up, up the street, and there was an awful lot of damage. There was Eddie's Market was down there in the corner, and there was so many places that they were filled. The cellars were filled with water.
Did they?
There's a lot of damage.
Yeah.
Did they? Around the drive, you will hear about that from someone else.
Did it, what did you remember most about it that particular day? Were you at home when it happened?
Yes, I was at home,
Was your son?
and he was at school. I came in from school. I think they let them out early. But as I say, we just didn't realize what was happening.
Mm-hmm. You didn't see any of those mammoth waves they talked
No,
about?
no, we didn't. See, we weren't. You know where the Pelham House is.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it probably wasn't hit as hard as some of the other places because on either side of it there was high buildings.
You were protected.
And there was a very tall tree there. Some of the limbs of that tree fell off in the yard, but there was no damage done.
How about anyone else in your neighborhood? Did they have any? Was there any really bad homes really torn down, or anyone hurt?
Not in that particular neighborhood. I don't think. Not that I can remember, and I'm sure I would get.
Because that was the weird thing. There was no warning of any kind.
It was terrible on the beach and places like that. I know a friend of ours, he said that he started running. He was at the beach and he started running up the hill. And he said he looked out and it seemed as though the ocean was rolling right up to the sky.
That must have been a
Of course,
scary.
I showed you a picture of one of the buildings, the interior before the hurricane.
You didn't see any buildings that were actually moved right around you off their foundations and torn down or whatnot. A little bit protected in here compared to
the other buildings. You see, that was at that time. There were buildings all along the waterfront, and it protected the ones behind our house on Pelham Street. And this house, of course, I didn't own this house at the time, but no damage had been done to this house.
Didn't really change your life then, did it in any way?
No.
For any long term? I mean, your life went sort of on. It was. How about anyone in the neighborhood, or did you feel that Newport was changed permanently
From the hurricane?
From the hurricane.
I don't think so. No.
Just went back and rebuilt.
Of course, there was a lot of damage, but there was more damage, I think, a lot of damage around the drive. Some of those houses that are exposed, and out at Ireland Park, of course, it was practically swept away. And there was damage here, but not in that particular neighborhood. It was sheltered.
You don't remember any dramatic stories of anyone rescuing, or particularly that you knew or even heard about, of rescues, or just? Well, I think that man coming in with the wave right behind him is sort of dramatic.
Going up the hill. No, I don't.
And how old would your son would have been at that age? That's 38. He would have been.
Seems as though he was 38.
When was he born?
He is. He's 57 now.
So I'm 59. So he was in 38. He was born in 36. No, 26. 26.
25 or 26, isn't it?
Yeah, no, 26, 38. Oh, he was about 12.
Yes, that's
So,
what I was
yeah.
going to say. He was about 12.
Did he and his friends get out and climb around?
Roger Evans, I remember, came in there with him from school. They lived at 81 Pelham Street. It's his mother's in this picture. And I know he was with him at that time. They were sent home from school early. That's the only thing that I remember.
They didn't get out and try to look at things over, because at that age, usually, Who was involved in the cleaning up of Newport afterward? Were those jobs for people who were out, do you know, out of work? Because there must have been tremendous cleanup.
At that time it was the WPA.
Oh,
I imagine they did the cleaning. I don't remember.
That's good. I'd forgotten them. And so now we get approaching World War II. After that hurricane, it was just a couple of years, and then we're started. The torpedo station was beefed up in 1940, and the change to the Navy town. How did you feel about that when they started bringing in all the extra Navy people?
Well, of course, it was a problem to find places for them to live, and restaurants were places for them to eat. And the torpedo station, had the torpedo station closed? No, they were open a while. That did affect us in a way, not not my family directly, but my daughter-in-law, her father was at the torpedo station, and he was laid off. So many people were. And she had one more year in high school, and I know he tried to find something to do so they could stay on here that 1 year so she could graduate from high school. I remember that. That happened to a lot of people. They didn't want to move their children still in school,
Right.
especially the ones their last year in high school. So that was a tragic thing for a lot of people in Newport.
And let's see, then when it started to beef up again, I guess in 1940, the torpedo, was he still here and got his job back, or had he had to leave?
No, he had to leave. They moved over, they bought a house in Attleboro. That's where my son and daughter-in-law, they had their reception after they were married in Cape Chapel. And he went to work for someone else over there. I can't remember the man's name now, but he was a good machinist. He's German, they're from Germany. And he worked there for a while. And then later on, he bought a package store in Providence. But she graduated from Rogers.
So she was able to stay. That's good. Now, let's see. Well, how was your life disrupted? Did your husband go into the service in World War II?
No, he was the age that, but he had athlete's feet. He went for an examination, so he was in that age group. He was just at the. But then I never thought that. I was afraid my husband would have to go in the service. I never thought my son would last that long.
See, that's right.
I remember just as soon as we knew about the war, we started buying in school. I would give my son change, and he would buy the little stamps that go into the books to make the war bond.
The war bonds, yes.
After war was declared, the morning after Pearl Harbor, going to the post office with him to buy one of those. He had enough stamps to buy a bond. I think it was $12.50 at that time. I'm not quite sure about that.
I think you're right. And then it got to be $25 when you turned it in.
The first one was $12.50.
Yeah, because I saved them, right.
Buy stamps in school, and then fill their books.
I remember that.
I remember, as I say, the morning after Pearl Harbor, I went down with him, and he was about 12 years old then. I was thinking maybe he was older than that.
Yeah, let's see. In 40, the war started in 41, actually. So.
Pearl Harbor was in 41.
And he was born in 26, 36, 25, 35 to 41. Would make him about 16.
Doesn't seem possible.
It doesn't, does it? No. Maybe he was a little younger. Maybe we figured. So.
He went in the service in 43, so he must have been.
Did he go right out of high school? Right out of high school. Yeah, that's what my brothers did. So you had family and went off. And how about your neighborhood? Did a lot of men go off to war, and were there a lot of?
Well, you see, in my neighborhood, as I told you before, Mr. Beulah, their son was older than my son, and he was a machinist. And they didn't take them in service.
No, because they needed them.
They needed them, so he didn't. And on the other side was this electric shop. There was no one there that I knew went in the service. And Mr. Cole, across the way, their daughter was married to an aviator, and I think he was killed in the war. And
so in a sense, there's your kitty. Everybody, pretty much had some way. Did you know anyone in the National Guard that was out at Fort Adams or in the Coast Artillery? All these things. According to my notes, everything was beefed up about 1940. They started getting ready.
I think Magruder was at the head of the Fort Adams, wasn't he?
I don't know.
Navy.
Well, they had a Coast Artillery, and then eventually, so it was one of the few forts that was still had somebody there, and then they. How about in the construction of the naval sites, building many of the neighborhood that you were in, working there when they were building barracks for the servicemen? And
Oh, no, I don't, they didn't build them, of course, in that area.
I just wonder if anybody worked on any of it.
No, no one that I knew of. I suppose they did, but not in that neighborhood.
Did anybody from that neighborhood go on the torpedo station? When they brought it up to 4,000 again, did you know anyone who was working on it then during the war?
Beulah next door.
And the machinist, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So,
up on the corner was a Mrs. Cogswell. She had that big house on the corner where it's on the the right-hand side coming down the corner. She had daughters. I don't think she had any sons. And as I said, Mr. Cole's son-in-law was killed. He was a Navy.
Well, that was when your Wyanna clubs?
Wyanna, that's when the Wyanna group
How
was
is that
formed.
spelled?
I think we spelled it Y and then hyphen A and then A. I should have it somewhere that I'll forget, but it's been a long time.
Well, it's one of those words you say, you never think. Now that was where you made your, you had played bridge?
Yeah, we did different things to raise money to pay for the sandwiches and cakes that we furnished for the servicemen on Sundays, and we always had a speaker or someone we thought would be interesting for them.
Was this held at the Y?
At the Y. We set up these long tables, and we always had a nice white tablecloth, and 200 and 300 sailors we would serve. And the Wyanna group was the head of that, but then there were people from different church groups would go and serve, and the different groups like the Pocahontas and the Order of the Eastern Star and the Jewish group, Hadassahs, and everyone helped.
Was it open just on Sundays for that, or?
For that particular week, of course it was open. It was a very busy place.
Right, where they were staying, right.
It was crowded.
But your
servicemen.
You held your reception sort of on Sundays, all day?
No, just at noontime, and we'd have a speaker. They'd come in to eat, and then they would sit around, listen to the speaker. Sometimes it would be a naval officer or anyone we thought they might be interested in hearing.
Must have been wonderful, because it was such a handy spot right there in town, and handy for you to get there. Well, you said, now the Trinity group also that you were in, did you say St. Margaret's put on things?
St. Margaret's Guild, that was after, of course they were there during the war. Then Dr. Scaife was the rector in Trinity at the time, and he had a service in K Chapel every Wednesday for members of the families who had someone in the service, and we used to go there. And of course, you met and became friends with different people.
Were you doing anything with the USO, which is really similar to what you were doing?
It was the same thing. And up at the Van Zandt house on Pelham Street, I think I told you that before. Every week you could go one day to make bandages or whatever they needed. Red Cross.
How about your rationing?
Oh,
the
yes,
stamps.
we had rationing. We used most of our coupons after my son went into service to get canned fruit and different things that we could send overseas. And there was a restriction on the size of the package you could send.
Oh, I remember. I'd forgotten.
The postman doesn't quibble with you. It had to be the right size, or you have to take it back.
I can remember my mother measuring so.
You had to measure it. You had to measure it, and we used most of our stamps to buy something to put in that package to send overseas.
Did he go overseas right away?
Yes, he did.
What branch was he in?
He was in the infantry.
Oh boy.
He was 18 about the time when they were planning on invading
D-Day.
in Europe. And I thought that where he was good in math, he would get in one of the training schools.
Oh, yes.
And I think he would have. But just a few weeks after he went in, they took all of those young men out who were in there 6 weeks or more and put them all in the infantry. See, they wanted them to an invasion of Normandy. And at that time, at the Pelham House, all of the officers, the Niagara was a small ship, and the chaplain from there came in and rented an apartment from us there, and he gradually got all of his officers in. There were only a few on that ship, on the Niagara. And I remember my son had been there in Europe 3 months, I think, and we hadn't heard from him for a while. And I remember one of them was a doctor. He came in the door, and I told him that they had invaded Europe in D-Day. And I said we were so afraid my son might be there. And he said, "Oh no, Mrs. Niles." He said they have men that have been there 3 or 4 years. And Brown, whose parents owned the Pelham Garage down there, he had been there that long. He was a few years older than my son. But you know, he was there. When we heard from him again, he was in the foxhole in Normandy.
God.
So
That was really an experience.
of course, that's the war. We're getting a little ahead of things, I guess.
No, that's what we want. No, 'cause, that just took me back. I've sort of forgotten where I was listening, because that's what I'm interested in.
I'm sentimental too, I guess.
Well, no, I know that they won't hear about that. Is that where he got his injury?
No, he went ashore in Normandy on D-Day 3. He didn't go the first day. He went the third day.
So, oh dear. Did you find that all the Navy, sort of going back a little bit to the beginning of it, when the Navy came in and all the preparedness and all the defense things that were set up, was this scary to them, the feeling that you were sort of a target, or was it a nice sense of security?
Yes, frightened. Pearl Harbor, I remember that morning, Sunday morning, when it happened. Everyone was frightened and amazed. That's all you could imagine that happening. Especially the Japanese. We thought they were negotiating with them. They were such fine people. I remember the little poem we learned in school. We were taught in school to think the Japanese were such kind, friendly people. It was unbelievable. It could happen to us, And then the terrible things that happened. All of those people killed.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable, and we were frightened, because I think everyone was frightened. They thought if they could do that in Pearl Harbor, they had knocked off a greater part of our fleet, if you remember. And so everyone tried in every way they could. The effort was a big one.
Yeah.
It succeeded.
So, Newport sort of was a real target. I mean,
yes,
this is what to me was
of course,
scary.
They all of so many ships.
When everything came here,
Yes, all of those people. There was many people here, I believe, at that time as there are in summer. And you can imagine what it would be like trying to find housing for all those people, when the only hotels we had really was a Viking and I think the Cranston. And but everyone tried.
But sort of glad to have him here to protect you, but sort of a frightened in a
way. But everyone, nearly everyone, had someone in the service, and they were eager to help the servicemen. I know I was. I'm sure everyone helped the same way.
Did you have many of them for a while in your apartments or in your neighborhood until they built the barracks? Because there are a lot of defense people were brought in too. Did you have them living in your apartments?
People who are working on
the bases as well as the servicemen?
Yes, I did. I remember carpenters and different. They had those before we the fleet. Before we got people from the fleet. The people who came in to work. And I know I remember we had 2 carpenters up on the 2nd floor. Well, the house was filled with construction workers for a while, then the Navy.
So it was really a big change for all of you. How about security measures? Did you have to have blackout curtains and all that?
Yes, we did. We had to have blackout. And of course we would have the warning, air raid warnings. and there were always warnings. Of course, we never had the real
Right.
air raid, but we'd turn off all our lights, and we're careful about lights at night too,
Mhm.
and pull our shades.
Did you have an air raid shelter? Did you go?
I think that you
to
could
the
go to the
cellar?
Y. There were different
Yeah.
places where you
Mhm.
could go. We didn't have one built here,
Mhm.
but then we had the air raid wardens,
Mhm.
people who, men who were too old to go in the service. They were wardens, air raid wardens.
They walked around all
Yes,
night, didn't they?
walked around, and if there was they would warn you to turn your lights off if they saw lights on, or your shades up and the lights on.
Mhm. Do you remember any particular memories about those years that things? Do you remember the submarine scares? There were a few, and most of them were farther up New
Yes,
England.
I think I told you about the chief who was he was on the first ship that was torpedoed by the Germans. That was before we entered the war.
Oh.
And they lived in a house there on Pelham Street.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm.
That was one of the tragic things that happened there on Pelham Street.
Mm-hmm. And I know
Of course,
in my...
it didn't happen there, but she lived there.
Well,
at the
yes,
time.
you know, you were aware of it. And any other particular... do you remember the excitement of VE Day, the day that Europe, Germans,
yes. Oh,
and...
yes, that was it.
Did you do anything special?
Oh, we went out.
Did you go to church?
I can't remember that I did. I went to church every Wednesday. I went every Sunday.
You were
more faithful than I am now, but I went to that service every Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
And,
How about VJ Day? Now, of course, that was the day that, and VE Day, I mean, you still had the war going on, but do you remember VJ Day? And did you go to the ceremonies downtown?
No, not downtown. I don't remember that I did, but I went to the Y often because I was active there.
So, that
I
was...
belonged to the Army Mothers, too. There
Oh,
was
that's...
an Army Mothers group and a Navy Mothers group, and they were women who had sons in this, sons or husbands or relative in the service. And of course, the Navy Mothers would be the Navy, people in the Navy, and then the Army Mothers. I belong to the Army Mothers.
Did you also do things at their meetings? You know,
Yes,
bandages and
yes,
things
I
like
did.
that?
I worked hard.
So you were busy from that every day was
with
something.
That house on Pelham Street.
How about, did any of your friends, good friends, husbands, or get called in, even though they were older, but because of their business or jobs?
One brother-in-law was too old. I have a brother-in-law. He is a chemist. They didn't take him. He tried to enlist, tried to get in chemical warfare, but they wouldn't take him because they needed him. And he was at the Chase Copper and Brass in Cleveland, Ohio, and they transferred him to Linden. And that's where we stayed when I went down to the World War Fair. We were living in Linden, New Jersey.
Did any of your relatives end up in service here in Newport for any reason? You know,
no, I didn't have any relatives, of course. Here.
And none of them were brought back or something to the service here. Let's see.
My husband's brother was in the service, but he didn't live here. He lived in Europe.
So when did your son get back? After victory in Europe? Did he come home?
Yes, he was wounded at St. Lo and then again at Brest.
Oh, twice. Was he back before the war ended, or?
No, he came back after the war ended.
Okay. Anything else you can think of about those years that were particularly good or bad? None of. Well, it was all bad.
Now, what year are we in now?
I'm going to go up to the Jazz Festival, but I just as soon if you know any more about the World War years or how we seemed to Newport. Did it get back to normal pretty quickly afterward?
Yes, it did. Asking me about. I told you about the Smith boy. His mother is in this group. And she used to play down at the Y. He wanted to get in the service, and there was something wrong with his arm. Do you find this interesting?
Yes.
and they didn't take him, but he did so want to get in the service. His father was in the Seabees, and through the influence of his uncle was against it, but he did help him. His uncle was a colonel in the army, so he finally got in the service, and he was only there a short time. He'd write to his mother and tell her about the not the bombs, but that were going over their heads from Germany,
yes.
and how frightened he was. And then soon after he went overseas, the Battle of the Bulge. You remember the Battle of the Bulge? He was killed in that.
Oh.
And I remember coming home and Mr. Rupp, who was head of the program, he was program director at the Armed Service-wide during the war. He was there with Mrs. Smith. She had heard, that her son had been killed overseas. That was a
Terrible,
thing.
terrible.
But he was just a young boy, probably 19, I think.
Yeah, I had a brother who was killed when he was 19, but in this country in the service, which is even more frustrating.
Across the way, the Nagels lived there on. They moved in later there on Pelham Street, and he is around here now. I think he's the only one over there in that house. He went in quite late, near the end of the war, and he was injured in an accident in Washington, D.C. I know his mother was very concerned about him. She asked me about my son and where he was and all when her son was went in, and he lost his leg.
Oh boy.
So he's there and on Pelham Street now, across the street.
So really, very few people were untouched.
Oh, that's true.
But then as soon as it was over, of course, that changed again. A lot of jobs were lost again because of all the defense industry.
Was filled 1 month and the next month it was empty. That was a devastating thing to happen to the people of Newport too.
Yes, right. We're going to discuss that because that was did you feel it was a gain or a loss? Later some people thought it was a gain, but
at the time it was a loss. And I think a lot of people sold property. They regret that now. If they had it, you see, like people who they might have had children at that age, several children, they owned property and they would sell it. And I know one family in particular, I'm not going to mention their names, they did that. And now their children have grown up and they have to their children buy homes and they have to pay 3 times as much for them as what they sold homes that they had owned, which they probably would have kept if it hadn't been for the Navy pulling up.
Feeling it. Well, now, when did it actually pull out? I had 73. Is that about right? Or was it earlier? Well, the only reason I'm asking, you were in how did the Navy down on 10th Street affect your antique shop? Did it bother you with all the bars
that was the strange thing about it. My business was better at that time than it is now.
Isn't that interesting?
And it's a good thing it was because I had bought this house and I had my shop and I had this house and the house on Pelham Street and I had the house empty on Pelham Street. Like everyone else, I had a mortgage on 2 houses and a rent for a shop.
Boy.
So I did manage to keep the house. And of course the taxes kept going, the mortgage and the insurance. So business was better then than it is now.
That's
in my
interesting.
shop.
Yeah. And so that the rowdiness and whatnot didn't
Of the fleet.
of the fleet, and I guess didn't down past, it would mean past you, but that was where all the bars were,
Yes,
wasn't it?
all the bars were there.
And so, but that's interesting. So that was better. Did you know many people who lost jobs because of that pullout in your neighborhood? Or anywhere, as a matter of fact.
Well, a lot of jobs were lost, and of course a lot of houses, and some of the housing projects were empty, like
all of a sudden, right.
Park Home, and not Park Home, but what is the other one?
Yeah, I know the one you mean. Still empty. Because it was a really disaster for a while. How was the standard of living around? Did it just kind of drop off? Or some? Of course, some people are always get along. And
yes, of course, I was alone. I don't know how that affected other people. I
but you're
much about that.
And you didn't know about any agencies that were helping people to make up for the loss?
The Navy.
And any other agencies that were, like after the Depression when we had things, and you don't know of any that came in after the,
No, I don't.
I think, go back to that again in a minute, but, what was it like? Now, were you close enough to see what 10th Street was like on a Friday night or weekends when the Navy was in?
It was busy.
Could you hear it up where you were?
During the war, when the Navy was in, you would go into a place to get a sandwich or ice cream, and there would be someone, all I could think of, breathing down your neck, waiting for your seat. So
it was just like summer.
Yes, it was crowded, and all the restaurants were crowded. And of course, every available place, every room in homes was rented. And when the Navy pulled out, of course, it changed all that. Of course, they had built in the meantime all these different housing projects too, so it wasn't as crowded. But it did affect a lot of people.
Did you see many things closed right away along there, restaurants or
yes,
shops?
There were a lot of places closed. The restaurants and of course people who rented apartments, like my house, then over on School Street, Mrs. Evans, she's a friend of mine, she had that big house on School Street that the Restoration Foundation bought. It was empty, and it had been, you just don't know what to do or how to manage when you have a big house with 10 or 12 or 13 apartments and suddenly they're all empty.
You have to keep them up too.
Yes,
yeah.
You have to pay the taxes and if you have a mortgage. You have to pay that.
And you say 3 years it was,
yes,
yours was empty.
3 years.
And what caused it to start filling up, the redevelopment?
Well, I started I had it restored, not restored actually, but I had an awful lot of work done, and as fast as it would, I'd get one apartment. The Fitzgerald, Miss Fitzgerald and her daughter, they moved in there. They rented an apartment before very much work had been done. They could visualize it the way it would be, so they rented an apartment on the second floor. They lived there 2 or 3 years, and I had the L taken off. I didn't have it completely restored like Miss Duke has restored her houses, because it would have taken away so many bathrooms and all, and I didn't want it. I didn't want to sell it, and I didn't want to live there. I didn't want it for my home. I had this house there, but it rented. The apartments rented as fast as we had them available.
Did you find most of your renters were stayed a long time? They weren't just in for 3 or 4 months and out again?
No, they stay over there.
That's the best kind.
I have a young couple, the Fitzgeralds were in that one apartment. They were the first ones to rent it when I started having work done on the house, and they were there 2 years. Now there's a young man over there. He and his another young man. They've been there 3 years, and they stay
That's
all
good.
winter. Last winter though, I had only 2 apartments rented there.
No.
It isn't, I think there are a lot of vacancies here in Winter. I hear them discussing it on the open forum and how high apartments are and how difficult it is to find them, but I think they're around, they can be found.
Yeah, I think you're right. And do you have any feelings about why you think the Navy people who, after all this, have now come back, so many of them, to retire here? You know, it's amazing that they live all over the world and they pick this place to retire to.
Well, they have the commissary and it's on the ocean and it's has so many things that they're accustomed to. And so many of them have attended the War College, the naval officers who come back. And it seems like home to them. I suppose they must have been happy here. They wouldn't come back.
Do you think there's certain parts of town that they seem to settle most in? We have a lot on the Point, for instance.
Over on the Point, I think.
Of course, it's close to the base
there,
again.
On Washington Street, are there a few on Washington Street?
And then, of course, there's some out around in. They're really all over, aren't they?
Aren't they? And some are out in Middletown, I think, too.
But it's interesting. Did the jazz festival affect you at all? You know.
I didn't approve of it.
That affected you.
I think the jazz festival, maybe the people who came here to listen to the music, but then there were so many followers of the jazz festivals that I don't think they bought a ticket, or I don't think they brought any money into Newport, and it was crowded and noisy.
And then eventually riots. Could you hear it from here? I mean, they were up at Freebody Park up there. Could you?
Well, I was living on Ellery Road.
Oh, okay.
The first jazz festival. I can tell you a little story about my nephew who came down from Plymouth to go to the jazz festival. He is dead now, poor young man. But he was a tall, blonde, handsome young man, and he came down to go to the jazz festival, and he stayed with me over on Ellery Road. And when he got up the next morning and came out, he had a black eye.
Oh boy! And
he said that a man and woman were quarreling, and he thought he ought to help the woman, and he did, and it was the husband, and this was up there. On Bellevue Avenue, and the first jazz festival was held up there. And well, I remember that my husband was sick. He went in the hospital, and the doctor was away. He told to stay away during the jazz festival.
Don't be sick. Then you never went to one. No. How about your son? Was he at home then? He was gone, and he didn't. So. Was your property affected in any way? Any of the rioting down? Did it get down this far?
No.
Pelham or up Ellery Road? No. You were lucky that way. Then how did you feel about them being continued in 72?
Well,
Do you feel they brought anything to Newport, money or anything?
I suppose they do, but they bring a lot of noise and confusion too. We seem to have enough of that.
Good point. And as you said, the followers are the bad news part. Did you think the city handled it well when they had that riots that finally?
I suppose they did with the police they have. Of course, I'm sure they needed more policemen. But there isn't much you can do with a noisy, rowdy crowd like that.
Gets sort of catching, and it just gets out of hand. How do you feel about a place that living in a town with, where you do attract these kind of things?
Well, I think I like Newport. I don't think right now I'd want to live anywhere else. But I suppose they're attracted to many towns. This is a seaport town.
So. Because I guess the last one went off fairly well. It wasn't quite the same, and they confined.
They're getting a different crowd than
different crowd, right? Did you ever take the Newport ferry?
Yes.
Often?
Well, whenever I'd have a guest, I'd take them over to Block Island.
Uh-huh.
Some of them got seasick. My father, I took him over there, and he got seasick on the way back. They said that oftentimes people who wouldn't get seasick taking an ocean voyage, they were going to Block Island. So I don't know how true that is.
That's interesting. It's pretty rough out there,
It's
too.
rough out there somewhere. Around Point Judith, I think it is.
Mm-hmm. Did you go regularly, like over on the ferry to Jamestown to go anywhere? Was it a regular thing with you?
Oh, well, we went quite often, and of course you had to take the ferry to get out of town at that time. I'm sorry that someone in Newport didn't buy one of those ferries and keep it. It would have been a wonderful thing to have in Newport. Of course, I suppose they'd have to buy the dockage, the place to dock it and all, but
I think you're right. It would have been great.
it should have been kept. One should have been kept.
They were great fun.
Think how much fun people would have riding back and
Oh.
forth, the summer people.
Oh, it'd be perfect. Mm-hmm.
But they didn't.
Do you remember any particular rides? Did you take guests a lot on those on the other one to Jamestown and back?
To Block Island.
But
Well, I went over there several times. And then our Eastern Star group went over there one time. And the group, there was, of course, a chapter over there, an Eastern Star chapter. And that was a lot of fun. We stayed overnight.
Well, how did you feel about the bridge when it was built? Were you glad?
Oh, yes.
Mm.
I think we need another one now, don't we?
Do you think it changed Newport a lot? The bridge?
I don't know. Of course, when the ferry was there and before the bridge was built, there'd be a long line of cars. You'd go there and you'd have to wait sometimes 2 hours to get on the ferry. That's a nuisance for anyone. And I'm sure it. Sometimes people would come and they wouldn't come back again if they thought they had to wait that long to get across on the ferry.
So the bridge really did
Now,
help
I think
the,
it helped. Of course it did.
you know, brought in a whole new bunch of people. Did you ever know anybody that worked on the ferries, or any of the captains, or any special events happen on them you were on?
I did, but I don't remember their name now. I knew some of the people who worked on the ferry. I know someone particular who they'd worked there for years, but I don't even remember their name.
So it was a real era, wasn't it? That.
Oh, yes, it was.
How about the restoration and development? Now, you were sort of in the forefront of that yourself, weren't you? Without.
Well, John Brown, he was a friend of Miss Duke's, and I think he's the one who really got her interested in the redevelopment. I know they went around and looked at the different houses, and he tried to buy my house on Pelham Street at the time they bought Beulah's next door, but it was full, and I didn't. I suppose I have a sentimental attachment.
Oh, I
to
guess
that house.
so.
I had it when I had a family, so I didn't sell it, and she bought the house next door. I think she owns 65 or more.
Something
houses
like
now.
that.
And I think that was a wonderful thing because it encouraged other people to restore their houses, or at least paint and repair them.
Did you, when you fixed up yours before she started, right? Your house on Pelham, did you?
No.
Oh, it was after
No,
that.
it was after. You
Oh,
see, that was after the war. The fleet went out 3 years after the fleet.
So that was when you started your
vacant,
restoration. So you were aware that it needed to be done, that the neighborhood just needed. Did you know that your house was historic? Did you recognize the quality of it?
Yeah. Oh, yes, I did, because I had gone through nearly all of these early houses. I've always been interested in early houses, and I think I've gone through every one of them. I wanted to buy the General Prescott house when my husband was living, when it was for sale. There was, I think I told you about that before, on the other part of.
That's not the one where the lady dropped dead, no.
No,
that was the one he got ill, right.
That was, the General Prescott house is on the corner of Pelham and Spring.
Oh, yes, yes, yes,
And,
yes.
I think I told you my son at that time worked for the state welfare, and he had a recipient in there, and he visited, and I knew that it was going to be for sale, and I wanted to buy it. And then I looked at ever so many houses.
Did you sell any to Miss Duke?
No, they wanted to buy the one on Pelham Street, but I didn't sell it.
And you didn't have any others that you sold to her?
I sold the one on Ellery Road after my husband died, but it wasn't a historical
It was not.
house.
Oh, mm-hmm. Did you know a lot of the workmen and craftsmen that worked on the restoring of the houses?
Well, yes, I did. Ford was one of the contractors who worked for Miss Duke, and I knew, of course, I later George Weaver worked for her, and the other man. I sold them a lot of things with some of the lanterns, a lot of the lanterns on the outside of their houses
really?
in the shop.
Really?
And
so you really benefited from that?
yes, I did.
Mm-hmm.
I did very well with selling things to them, finding things. There are a few things like my sister went through their museum down on Thames Street, and I said I called her attention to the fender and andirons, and I said they came from my shop, and there's a dry sink in there, different things, small things.
Oh, yes.
And she says, that's the last thing I would think about in this room is the andirons and fireplace equipment, because it had such beautiful furniture, you know, the Goddard and Townsend Highway and all the different things. But of course that was a joke, but I sold a lot of things to them.
That was great.
A lot of the china and pottery that's in the cupboards, and the lights that are outside in some of the houses. They were very kind.
That's great.
They very helpful in my shop.
Well, you must have been very helpful to them too, because
Yes,
you knew a lot of these things. Were you involved in the Operation Clobber that came before Miss Duke?
I wasn't. No, I wasn't active in that, but this house was open. We went through. I have a little brochure about that. Maybe some Miss.
Was that when the first
That's
very beginning?
That's one of the. They were the first group, I think, to restore houses here, the Cleveland group, and Mrs. Reynolds. Do you know Mrs. Reynolds?
No, I don't think so.
I'm surprised you haven't met her. Her husband's Professor Reynolds, and he moved that little house that's over on Washington Street with the little chimney.
Oh, yes.
They moved that in parts and from Providence.
Oh, for goodness sakes.
Over there. And she was very active in the Cleveland group.
That was really something.
And she's still here. I think she's working in one of the groups now. Miss Bullhouse will be able to tell you about her.
Did you know anybody that was displaced by the restoration? You know, when they bought up the houses, like somebody renting in a house, and then the people sold it, and they were, when Doris Duke bought some of this, certain families were uprooted. Did you know anyone?
Well, the only one I know of, and I don't think it was very, I don't think I should even mention it, was a man who lived upstairs on the second floor, he and his mother, and I think the mother died, and he had to give up his apartment. Of course, a lot of apartments might have been vacant too, and houses they bought, some of them were vacant.
Did you ever go to any of the council meetings or the city planning boards where they discussed doing all this?
No, I never did.
That must have been sort of interesting at
I'm
the
sure it
time.
was.
I heard somebody
I've
talk.
always been busy. Oh!
Aren't they something?
Oh, it's wrecked us.
I know. They're terrible that way. We have that problem. So, did you know any people that were really, well, you said this one man are displaced. Did you know people who really benefited from it? Did they get good prices for their...
I think people selling their houses benefited by it. I remember I bought things from a house over on the point, and it was one of those early houses where in the fireplace they had a concealed, it started there where the slaves were brought
Oh,
in through the
yes.
fireplace. And they had that house for sale. They sold it to the Restoration Foundation. A lot of those old houses were sold, and of course the people benefited by it.
Mm.
And they were in neighborhoods where, well, Pelham Street and Point, they were considered slum areas by some, and the houses, of course, didn't have very much value at the time. Their value increased.
That's right, nothing hurt there. Guess he's feeling a little better.
Oh, he is, I think.
It was hard to, I don't know, I guess Doris didn't pay a great deal, but as you said, some of the houses, I think in the Point, didn't even have inside plumbing, I guess, when she bought them.
They didn't.
So that helped. Was hard on some people, though, because the value of the property's gone up, so that people living around are in trouble.
Some people thought that it was a crazy idea for her to buy those houses and spend all that money restoring them. But I'm sure there isn't one of those houses that wouldn't sell for much more than their initial cost and the cost of restoration.
You're absolutely right. I guess she's pretty much done now. I don't know. Somebody said.
I think there's a little house there on Green Street. I think it's Green Street or Prospect Hill Street. They're erecting it from. I think they brought it in from some other town. They did that to a few places too.
That's quite a project, isn't
it? It's wonderful, you know, what has been done here in Newport. But I hope they don't build so many places like big hotels and all. It will be like the Cape.
Yes, I agree with you. That's the one trouble. People don't know when to stop.
No, they don't. And people from away come in, and the buildings that they build, the architects, their ideas are altogether different than they should be for this area. Like the library and the hotel. They should have local people.
I think
they're local architects who
right.
understand. The one thing that disturbed me, I suppose, more than anything else about buildings was that bank, the Industrial National Bank.
Oh, yes.
My shop was there when they knocked that bank down. That was such a beautiful building. And they were 3 days knocking it down. And that was an awful loss, I think. Imagine what it would cost to build a building like that now.
Well, this is it. And some of those were made so sound.
Oh, it was. And the marble pillars and the marble
I know. I agree with you.
And the Rhode Island arms on the top. It was a shame to do that.
It really is. See, that's the other side of redevelopment.
I don't like the walls along there either. Some people do, but I don't appreciate it.
I know. I agree with you. What other changes have you seen that you like or don't like? But you've seen so many of them, and you've been close to them. I think people who live outside of Newport don't really appreciate like somebody like you down here.
Of course, down on the corner, that's another place I tried to buy, was the corner lot down here, and it was sold. And I went through that house. You may not be applauded for this.
That's okay.
That's opposite Queen Anne Square. You know, that long little house there. It's a two-family house. And I think it was built, like this house was built for a middle-class family during the 18th century. And my house on Pelham Street was, I'm sure, built for a sea captain or someone with, it's more, it's the size of the Hunter House, and John Gidley built big, fine houses, and probably it had beautiful paneling. That's what should be down there opposite Trinity Church. There were so many houses available at that time. Why they would move that building there and erect it on Queen Anne Square opposite Trinity Church, I never thought that was a very smart idea. Do you?
No, now that you think, I never thought about it. But
it's an 18th century house, but it has no paneling. And when I went through it, it didn't have central heating or bathrooms, and it's just the wrong building to be there, I think.
And, you know, I just hadn't thought about it, but it makes me think. I'm going to go look at it again.
There was there's so many houses that had paneling, beautiful houses that they could have moved there. They moved that house there from, I think it was Green Street, one of those streets.
I forget. I'm going to go look it up and find out.
And they moved the little house on the corner from another street, too. That was moved from Memorial Boulevard, in the lower Memorial Boulevard. There's one right down here on the corner.
Right. And there was quite a bit of moving, which I hadn't realized when I first came here.
And there was a filling station across the street where the Trinity Church owns part of it now, but there was a gas station.
Trying to remember. Well, of course, when we came here, Egan's Laundry was here.
Yes, that was down on Mill Street. On Mill Street. And then this building down on the corner, when we paid payment on it, we were buying it, you know, and my husband died. It had a sign, it must have been the length of the building, you could see it everywhere. It was advertising the Newport Motor Inn way out there.
Oh,
they had things like that.
That I know. That's good to see those go. My husband's an anti.
Airport, that went.
So there's good and there's bad.
Yes.
My husband's an anti-billboard person, and so.
Such big ones
on
an old house.
I know.
Old house like that. But very few people were interested in those early houses at that time.
I know. It's funny, sort of hindsight. Then all of a sudden, but one person gets an idea
That's
and
true.
off and away.
I was interested in all of them. I think I've been through every one of them.
That must have been fun.
It was.
You know, to see them and to see the possibilities.
But the lack of money and my husband.
That was I don't know, you did pretty well to get what you've got.
Yes.
You've got some choice ones. And I think your story about your fireplace was so interesting.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That,
I wish we had taken a picture of that. Each fireplace is in perfect condition.
It must have been true of a lot of these places. Not necessarily, but you know, when they took off the outsides of them
Yes, that's true.
and found the...
You know what, too? I think that usually when they build another fireplace, you know, to improve it, they would tear the other one out. But you see, they didn't.
That's what really...
That's what made it interesting.
That may have been cost, do you think? And
it might have been. That's why we have all these early houses.
Yeah,
in
they
good
couldn't...
condition as they are, because people, of course, couldn't afford to restore
or tear them up or anything.
To repair them or
so.
remodel them. They would have if they didn't see this port, as you know, was blockaded during the Revolutionary War, and from then on they
downhill.
They couldn't afford to do some of the things they did in other ports. It's a good thing for the town.
Wasn't it? Such a blessing. It really is. It's very. I love to tell that story to people. That's why we have more than any other place. So there was some good coming out of it. How about the cup, the America's Cup? What was the first one you remembered? Must have been the first one. Let's see, with 1851, and from then on. Do you remember them particularly? What was your earliest memory of the races?
Oh, I remember. Oh, yes, I remember them, but I don't remember anything. The only thing, when I first started in business there, I thought, well, I must get my window filled with things that they'll be interested in.
Right.
But I learned better than that as time went on, because they're really not that interested in antiques in the small shops. The people who are interested in the antique shops are people who come to go through these 18th century houses, and in the big houses where they see the oriental porcelains and all, then they go to the shops to see what they have in the shops. But I don't think the people who come for the races, they're interested in boats.
That's it.
They're not interested in antiques.
So, were you ever involved in them in any way at all?
No. I had invitations to the balls for them.
Yeah, right. Pretty expensive, those balls, aren't they? Now, how about, what do you think was their main contribution? Obviously, you did.
Well, I think they bring a lot of money into town.
Restaurants,
and I think they, of course, they put Newport on the map in a way. You know, everyone knows about Newport. You often hear it mentioned, and I know in books I've read, surprising, you'll hear Newport mentioned. I read one just recently, and said something about the styles in Newport. Of course, that was a Victorian
Mhm.
book written during the Victorian years.
But this is,
But I think it did that for Newport, and it brings a lot of money into the bars and the restaurants
Mhm.
and the hotels.
mhm.
So money is moved around.
Did it affect your neighborhood at all, particularly?
The yacht races.
Mm-hmm. Any business brought into your neighborhood? You say your shop didn't.
Well, I
yeah.
suppose some, but not like the business they get in the restaurants and the hotels.
No. Did you
There
know
are other
that?
businesses that would bring more
Mm-hmm.
to an antique shop than the yacht races.
Did any of your neighborhood, were they involved with them? Summer jobs or anything that to do with the cup
Oh, I
races?
think so. Like, I don't know of anyone really personally, but I know I'm sure they were affected.
Probably a lot of the young people,
Yes,
especially,
that's
they
what
get
I was
those.
going to say. Young boys and girls, they especially in the restaurants.
Mm-hmm. Get extra jobs and. Did